Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast. It's great to be here. Thank you everyone for joining, listening live, listening later. Okay, so let's get right into it. This week I wanted to sort of carry on a little bit from last week. The previous episode we spoke a lot about the physical needs, what people need, the Earthship biotexture list of the 5 needs of human beings, and those are our physical needs. Also, if there's any problem with the sound or anything, let me know so I will fix it, but I will carry on. So this week I wanted to talk a little bit about our social needs, the needs that are extra after we've basically taken care of all of our physical needs. We have other needs as human beings, conscious needs. Evening, Revised Psychology. Great to see you here again. Thank you for joining. So, basically last week spoke about the Earthship list of the physical needs. And this week I wanted to talk about someone else, Maslow's triangle of needs. So I'm just going to throw up a picture here very quickly, and hopefully you can all see that in chat. This is Maslow's triangle of needs. Now, I have to say that when I was devising this system and working out the different social needs that the ecoVillage will take care of, I hadn't heard of Maslow. So this was actually a friend who told me afterwards, but once I'd seen it and, seen the list of needs, it fit right in. So I will say that I don't know too much about Maslow, and I really am not an expert, but it seems to be a very well-known and fitting example of what I'm going to talk about. So as we can see, the first level in the triangle is physiological. That's what we talked about this last week. It's a bit different than the categorizations, but it's the same basic principle. The next one is safety, and this pertains to the feeling of security inside the ecoVillage. I won't go into what we started talking about in the first episode, the different rules and how do you make sure that everyone is safe, etc. But we're going to count those 2 as part of our sort of physical needs and move on to the next. So in his categorization, the next is called love or belonging. Now, I think this is a very basic concept for us to understand, and I think we've all come to recognize how important it is to have company and to have friends and to have a circle of people that we feel close with. And this is very easily provided by the ecoVillage once there are a group of people living together. So this is the part which I'm going to focus on a bit less because it seems to me very, very straightforward. If there are any questions or anything you want to add, then please feel free. But basically, once you have a community of people living together, working together, however intimate that may be, people naturally develop their relationships with certain people a bit closer, certain people less intimate, but still, friendships and working together. So that's all very straightforward. The next category, Maslow called esteem, which the name itself is less important as far as I'm concerned. But the way that I see it, if I had to Revised Sociology says this is huge in teaching theory, by the way. Yeah, it's actually very big in a lot of different specific subjects. I know in business management they talk about it and all these different things. I think it's a very, very basic, root concept, and that's why it can be relevant to a lot of different things. But yes, I'm ashamed to say that I'm not knowledgeable enough about Maslow and about the sociological theories, but it really does fit in beautifully with the ecoVillage model. So when it comes to esteem, Maslow lists a few things. I call it in general a sense of accomplishment. And by that I mean the development of a healthy ego. Now I think there's another way which we can see this triangle and this development, and that is the human development, as in when a person is born, they actually go through these different phases to a certain degree. And you can see that in the beginning there's very little beyond the physical and the feelings of safety, and there's not yet really any connection, there's no eye contact, there's no sort of relationship that's really giving and taking. And then as the child develops and grows older, they start developing more of an understanding of themselves as apart from the group, an understanding of others, and then others' needs, which can be different. And this whole psychological development can be seen on an individual level as well. And I think all of these are sort of important to go through at the same time, but they are to a certain degree leaning on each other, and there's a certain linear process that goes on. You can't really take care of esteem before your physiological needs are met. So when we're talking about a sense of accomplishment and developing a healthy ego, we're really talking about the ability to feel worthy, the ability to be engaging in something, whether it's work or whether it's study or some kind of activity where you feel a sense of accomplishment, you feel you have something that you can give. You basically start to find your place in the world. And so I want to take a moment here before I move on and mention one concept that is very important to me. It's not a very well-known concept because it comes from a very large body of information that doesn't pertain specifically to sociology and what we're talking about. But I want to talk about specifically this concept which is called Ubuntu. That's a word from an African language. I'm ashamed to say I don't know which African language, but it comes from South Africa. And this term Ubuntu, U-B-U-N-T-U, if you try Googling it or looking it up somewhere, you won't actually find what I'm talking about. You'll probably find the Linux, I can't remember what it's called, but the Linux manager, whatever it is, which has the same name. So not to be confused with a software program, Ubuntu is an African philosophy. And the term that is used, or the phrase that's used, is unity within community. And that means basically it's a very big concept whereby if something is done, it's done utilizing the individual's capabilities, utilizing the individual's specialty and uniqueness, and using that for the greater good of the community, of the group of people. And so to put it another way, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take every individual and give them what they need in order to be who they need to be, and in order for them to be able to develop, and gearing that and using that for the general good of everyone else. So that's a very quick run through about Ubuntu. It actually comes from a man, well, I heard about it from a man called Michael Tellinger. And the phrase itself, Ubuntu, is not his, but he adopted it when he was developing an idea that's similar to the ecoVillage. There are differences, but certainly there are a lot of similarities, and I think it's worth mentioning him. So maybe I'll try and put up a link here for later. But if you have a chance to look up Michael Tellinger, he's a very interesting man. He started work a long time ago in trying to rectify some of the systems and some of the broken systems that are running, the monetary systems and the legal systems, etc. He didn't he wasn't that successful in his attempts to change things through the system, and he eventually decided to change tactics. He was actually running the South African party, the Ubuntu party, and he was trying to run for office in South Africa. He didn't get voted in. I think he ran twice. And eventually he decided that the way to go would be to find a mayor of an existing town and to approach him with this idea and to have it implemented in an already existing town on a much smaller scale. And so his idea was to again have renewable energies as the only source of energy for that town, and to be growing their own food and to be starting self-production. And he has this whole big plan called One Small Town, if you'd like to look it up, or if you know of any mayors who may be interested. He's looking for people who are willing. And it's a little bit of a larger scale than what the eco-village model that I'm talking about is. It's about, he says, 1,000 people. And then with 1,000 people working 3 hours a week on community projects, you get 3,000 work hours that you can then utilize to develop this idea. That's basically what he says. And we'll see that the eco-village model differs slightly on some of those issues. But the idea that I want to focus on is this esteem, the idea of a sense of accomplishment and respect from others and a feeling of belonging. And I really think that in today's modern era, we suffer from two big problems. First of all, there is not a lot of emphasis on individuals developing themselves, developing their desired skills, finding out what they want to do. There's much, much more of an emphasis on skills which are monetary valuable, so that they can bring in an income. And so a lot of people end up studying and then working in fields where they don't really feel a sense of accomplishment because they're not that interested in what they're doing. I'm sure everyone either knows or has heard of someone who fits this description. The other thing that we're lacking, I think, in our modern era is that once I've found something that I do and that I enjoy and that can really fulfill me, I'm still usually disconnected from the rest of the people in my life. Meaning we have our work colleagues, the people who we work with, the people who we go to that place. And then we have our friends and our family who are usually separate and usually somewhere else. And I think this leads to a certain disconnect whereby, I don't know about you, but in my experience, both as a child and as an ex-kindergarten teacher, children today don't really know what their parents do. And I think a lot of spouses as well, you know, if it's a certain kind of office job that's very specific, you hear a lot of the times people talking about their job, describing it, and it really is hard to understand because you're not part of that world. It's such a different experience for me when children have a parent who's one of these like traditional, you know, workers, whether it's, I don't know, a carpenter, or even a doctor, or something that the children can really grasp and know what that means to a certain degree. It really helps that connection. And when you come home and you say, you know, oh, what did you do today? Well, I made a bunch of, I have no idea, I don't know, but let's say something in computers, I worked on this software, I did these things. You're not getting that sense of satisfaction. Whereas, for example, if you came home with something that you had made from wood, it would be much easier for the people around you to connect and to respect and appreciate your work, and therefore you could have more of a sense of accomplishment. So I think the idea of the eco-village that's talking specifically to the esteem is that once you unify, to a certain degree, your workplace and your, let's say, family and friends, your living environment, when we stop disconnecting that and we stop separating those two worlds, we find that it's much, much easier to, I think, both connect those two worlds, obviously, and to really advance. because you're not separating it in your mind as well. You know, there's like, leave your work in the office. When I come home, I stop thinking about it. When I get to work, I don't think about my family. And that's I think it can be a less efficient way to both do the work and to spend time with the family, where work is something enjoyable that you do. You know, I'll give an example. My dream is that my son will grow up never having to be too far away from me. Meaning I'll obviously be working in the ecoVillage doing whatever needs to be done, but he can always come and see what I'm doing and talk to me, you know, to a certain degree, of course, but that's a very, very different experience to a child who's used to seeing their parents go away in the morning and come back in the evening from this mysterious place that no one really knows what's going on. So I hope that explained a little bit about you know, what I mean in general when I mean sense of accomplishment and being able to develop a healthy ego in the surroundings of your family. Okay, Rondon, yes, Ubuntu. It took me ages, Rondon, to find anything about Ubuntu that wasn't Linux related. It was very frustrating. Yeah, Revised Sociology says the more incomprehensible someone's job is, the more money they seem to make. Yeah, I'm sure wages increase as the necessity for the job decreases. I'm sure you're right, because what happens is that people end up needing to invent some new job to make themselves needed, and then you get these very, very silly titles. I myself was, I worked as a project manager, which basically meant I was the, you know, tech guy helping people work out the website that I was working with. But the title project manager sounds so, it was just very funny for me. Yeah, so it's a very interesting situation, definitely. But speaking of you know, being able to do things and to create and to work in something that's much more, dare I say, real, part of the real world, the next level in Maslow's triangle is called self-actualization. Now, I could go on to speak about self-actualization for a long time, and it's a very, I think, mysterious concept, what exactly it means. But I will try and encapsulate a little bit of what I feel is the need, and as well what the ecoVillage can do, or how the ecoVillage model suggests to answer that need. Yeah, project. Yeah, I had it on my LinkedIn profile, project manager. So self-actualization. Maslow writes here: morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem-solving, lack of prejudice, acceptance of facts. I think that's all rather heavily based on sort of a psychological view, and I'd like to broaden it up a bit more. I think if self-actualization is sort of leaning on esteem, meaning you can't reach that until you've got a developed healthy ego, until you feel worth and you feel respected, then that means that self-actualization needs to be some form of development of that. And that's at least how I see it. I think that self-actualization in this sense means being able to fulfill your potential. That means if you're allowed to, if you have all of your other needs answered, if you have nothing left that you want, what would you do? How would you be? How would you behave? And I think that's a situation that today I find it very hard to think of anyone who is really in that position where day in and day out they have the time and the availability to just do what they need to do or do what they want to do, without taking care of all these other things like jobs and paying the bills and buying food, etc. So the idea of the ecoVillage model, if we'll take it all together now and try and piece it according to this triangle, is that in the beginning we have our physiological needs, which the ecoVillage provides for with minimal amount of work. So for most of the people, they don't actually have to work in the garden or do all of these things, and the needs are automatically provided for autonomously. The next is safety, which we spoke about as being provided, that people will feel both a sense of security and also a sense of belonging and of being part of the community. And then we have self-esteem, where we'll talk specifically about children because I think it's easier to see it. Children would be allowed to simply be and follow their own curiosity and their own interests, and really, let's say, put as few boundaries and limits on them as possible. Obviously, this comes after safety, but I do try to raise my son, or I'm trying so far, to raise my son in that way, where if something isn't really dangerous, try and allow that sense of curiosity to stay, and to allow him to do what he wants and follow where he wants to go. And so if you have this environment where children are allowed to do all of that, then what happens? Well, I believe, and this is going to be tested obviously in time, that what would happen is that people would reach this level where they really could only focus on what they felt a calling for and what they wanted to. And because people are so different and individuals are so unique, you would have a very, very wide variety of interests. And obviously we know how people can, even in the same area, be drawn to different things, and it would be encouraging of that. There would be no sort of line that you have to follow, or a certain template that you need to fit into, but you would actually be allowed to really pursue your own personal endeavors. And I think if people were allowed to do that, it could push them much, much further than what we see today, where I'm not really talking about experts. I'm not just talking about someone who is allowed to sit and do the one thing that they know better than anything else all day long. I think we have people who do that, but that isn't necessarily self-actualization in my mind. I believe that true self-actualization has to be a certain balance between all of these distinct and different parts that we have in ourselves. And I think what would happen then is that you would have people who are healthy and happy, and therefore much easier to get along with in general, who are fulfilling themselves and attempting to achieve a balance in themselves in all of these different areas. Sorry. So that's the general idea of how we see this triangle overlapping the eco-village model, and how the eco-village is actually meant to provide each of these different parts of the triangle and provide the environment for people to develop healthily. So now I think we'll move on to a bit of the practicality of that. This idea, an eco-village that answers all of humans', let's say, basic needs, is an idea that can be taken very, very far. When I was thinking about this, and when I was considering what size it should be, and well, really it started when my wife and I were thinking, okay, we want to live off-grid. I call it 100%, but it's actually 95%. Self-producing and autonomously taking care of the eco-village of our life. So how do we do this? And very quickly I realized that in order for us to make our own clothes and cook our own food and grow everything that we need, we really needed more people. To do that, just the two of us would be impossible, really and truly. And so we began talking about, okay, so if we have more people, how do you do this? And I think very quickly, everyone here probably can agree that there is this problem when you grow in numbers to a certain point that it's too much. You can't take care of this number of people from one place, as it were. And so that's what really led to all of these systems that we see of cities and people trying to, having governments in charge of hundreds of millions of people is a very difficult thing to manage. So what's that magic number? What's the number of people that we can have in an eco-village where we can provide for ourselves and it won't be too much work, but it's not too many people that you can't actually manage it? So if you remember from the first episode, I actually mentioned this. We came up with a figure of 50 families, and let's say an average of 4 people per family. And this obviously includes individuals as well. It's not just families, but roughly about, now my math is tested, 200 people. And I think that I actually haven't checked this before the show. So if any of you know anything about this, then let me know. But the maximum number of people, 150. Hang on. Yeah, 50 for 4 people if we average it out. I don't know. But between 150 and 200, let's say. I think if I remember, there's a number of people that we can hold sort of in our memory that was 150 people. And so this number seems to be a certain limit that as individuals we can stretch in calling ourselves part of this group and actually knowing them. And there is a reason for this, 50 households, as it were, and why we need so many. And I think the point, hang on. Okay, before I go on to this, I'm just going to read through chat because I can see some comments. Tainted Blood said, this reminds me of a thing a guy came up with, how we can automate everything. Yes, the Venus Project. Okay, I'm gonna, please remind me if I forget. At the end of the episode, I will come back to the Venus Project and say what I think. Dunbar's number, Rondon said, yes, that's exactly it. Was it 150? I can't remember now. But yes, Dunbar's number. Interesting study. If you haven't heard of it, check it out. There's a link in the chat. But basically, the idea is not just how many people we can hold a relationship with, but how do we utilize those 150 to make the eco-village work? And this is where we come into both esteem, a sense of accomplishment, and self-actualization being critical parts of having 150 people working together individually and keeping this place active. And so I want to make it very, very clear. Rondon says 150 to 250. Oh, come on. That's pretty spot on as far as I'm concerned if I said 200. So the idea is that it's not just one person who is in charge of something. So let's say we have someone come to the eco-village and they're very skilled and experienced carpenter. And so that person, starts working in carpentry. I think very often we have this idea of utilizing everyone's individual capabilities means you get assigned your role and that's what you do to provide for the village. We have our carpenter, we have our blacksmith, we have our gardener, and those are the people who do those things, and that's it. And I really have a problem with that model. A, because I personally wouldn't really want to be pigeonholed into one, line of work. And B, because I don't think it's the best option. I think it would be much, much better if, as we said before, when it comes to self-actualization and a sense of accomplishment, if every person was allowed to pursue different avenues. And that doesn't just mean that you find what you're good at. So I'm going to try and do this for a while, and if I see that I'm not very good at it or that I don't have a natural talent, then I'm going to move on and do something else. It actually means developing skills that may not be the best skills that you have or the thing that you do better than anyone else, but it's still something that you want to do, that you feel a calling to do for whatever reason. To be allowed to come and do that and to actually get better at it. And this is something that I want to talk about a little bit because I think it's a very interesting concept. This thing which we call creativity, which seems to be both very elusive as to what exactly it means. We say some people are very creative, but we have lots of books on how to develop creativity. We say sometimes creativity is sort of doing things differently, and yet obviously artists and people who work in the arts are doing things that are beautiful, as it were, whether it's visually or otherwise. And so this idea of creativity, I think, is very, very important, because the power of creativity is what needs to be harnessed in order for all this to come together, for the eco-village to actually function. Creativity is not just innovation and thinking of new ways to do it, but it's actually also part of our self-expression. This is, I personally believe. I should say that in my life, growing up and for a long period of my early adulthood, I was very, very rational and very interested in the mental side of life. I wasn't very physical. I didn't really, as it were, I think I put less emphasis on the senses and the physical experience than the mental experience. And it was after some time that I started going through this process of realizing that this self-actualization, this reaching my full potential, meant that I had to balance myself out to a certain degree. And I really started this process of really trying to do the things that didn't come naturally to me, and really going outside of my comfort zone purposely in order to challenge myself, in order to try something new. And so I'll just give a very small example, but I was never very interested in food. I didn't really enjoy food. I think I come from a family of people who do enjoy it very much, and so it was very clear to me all along that this was something I just felt less connected to. It was less important for me. I know this is a very unpopular opinion, so please don't judge me. But I decided that if that was the case, what I'd try to do is I'd go into baking. I think baking felt a little less intimidating than cooking, weirdly, because afterwards people told me that baking is much more complicated and it's much easier to cook. But at the time it felt that baking was, I think, more strict and more rational, very exact, almost a science. And I think that made me feel more comfortable. But it was still a very, very strange experience to be making food. I hadn't really made anything. I was creative, and I did do, my things in the arts, but I was a musician, and I was really focused more on all different aspects of music, never really visual arts or creating something that lasted. And so I think baking bread, maybe it wasn't the first, but it was one of the first experiences where I sort of put my energy in and created something that wasn't there, and even more so, something that people enjoyed later. That was a very special experience for me, and it changed me quite a lot. It was after that I started getting into weaving. For the life of me, I don't know why. I mean, I did more martial arts than weaving in my life. I'm not a very... It seemed to be a very strange decision, but it was certainly the right decision. I actually fell in love with it. I haven't done anything in a long, long time because I don't have the tools, but I'm really looking forward to get back into it. But it's interesting how I'm not very good at weaving. I'm not very good with my hands. I wasn't very good at baking in the beginning, but I worked at it and did it again and again, and I improved. And over time, this really made me think about this idea of balancing out and self-actualization. I sort of started looking at all the people around me and thinking how often we limit ourselves. I did the same. How often we say, oh, I can't do that. I don't do that. I'm not a... And that can sort of stay the case for a very, very long time, possibly our whole lives. I think one of the most common ones that I know is language. People always say, I'm not very good at languages. I don't know what being good at languages is. I mean, obviously, some people I think are very talented, but to a certain degree, languages are very hard, and learning a new language is very difficult. But whenever people start learning a new language, very often they'll say, "Oh, I'm really someone who's not very good at it," and that sort of paints it in this difficult color, where I'm constantly thinking, "Oh, this is a challenge for me. This isn't something that comes easily. This is something that I'm going to struggle with," and it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy to a certain degree. As I mentioned, I have a son. He's almost 11 months old, 10 and a half. And it's really fascinating to watch him because he has no fear. He has no limits that he put on himself, which is strange because he's a baby. He can't stand up, he can't walk, he has trouble holding things and moving, but you see in his face both the determination when he wants to do something and his complete lack of any sort of embarrassment or sense of failure when he does it again and again and again and keeps not managing to do it. And I'm really trying to absorb that as much as I can, and to be able to develop that fearlessness where, yeah, I'm not good at this. I don't know how to do it. This is the first time I've ever tried. And that's okay. No one's good at the first time. And if you work at it and you carry on, you'll get better. Maybe you'll never be amazing. Maybe you won't even be very good, but you will definitely improve. And I think that is the sense and the feeling that I want people in the eco-village to have, where you walk by the metal, what's it called? Not metallurgy, but the blacksmith, let's say, workshop, and you hear them banging away. I want everyone to have a complete sense of confidence to just walk in and say, hey, can I try blacksmithing a bit? I've never done it before. I've never picked up a hammer. I've no idea what you do, but it sounded interesting. I want to check it out. And occasionally you get these stories of people who, thanks to something like that, they were just walking along or whatever, they find their passion, or they find something that they're very good at, or not. They come and they try blacksmithing and they even make something and they have that as a trophy, and they never do it again because they weren't that into it, but for the rest of their life they can say, yeah, I made that from metal. I can't remember the verb of working with metal, I apologize, but it's a personal passion of mine. I can't wait. I've never done anything, but I really am looking forward to being able to do it. So bringing this back to the eco-village model and how it's supposed to do this, I hope I've managed to more or less convey the idea of having people who are living there, who are completely taken care of their needs, who are fulfilled in terms of what they desire, and who are allowed to freely pursue whatever avenue they want. When you do that, I really believe that you can have a community of 50 people where everyone is engaged, everyone is working, because this goes back a little bit to what we talked about in the first episode, but I think that if people are taken care of and if they have food and water and shelter and everything, they don't really want to just stay in bed all day and do nothing and watch TV. They actually have a need to do something that makes them interested and do something that's creative. And even if people in today's modern area are so hypnotized and have lost touch with their creativity to such a degree that they don't see the point, I would like the eco-village to be a place of rehabilitation where people can come and rediscover themselves and rediscover their creativity. People can come who were doing something very different with their life, and after spending some time in the eco-village, being surrounded by these people who are all very friendly, and it's a very strange place where everyone is an individual. It's not a commune where everyone's doing the same, and yet there's a general agreement and acceptance as to what we want to do here and how we allow everyone to be. And so people can come to this environment and learn from others and see, oh, they're trying new things and it's not just for experts, and there are lots of different levels that we don't need to feel intimidated. And they'll be allowed to rediscover their creativity and rediscover their inner self and really be allowed to express that in whatever way they want. Now, I just want to say that that was, oh, excellent. Tainted Blood is just shared. I love Alan Watts. So I just want to say very quickly before I move on to some questions. How are we doing for time? Okay, if anyone has any questions about this so far, feel free. I think I didn't miss anything on the chat. Oh, study says we can remember, Tainted Blood said, a study says we can remember 10,000 faces but recall 5,000. Right, and faces, yeah, is, you know, if you think about all the faces that we recall, celebrities and people we don't know, then obviously it gets filled up very quickly. So when we're thinking about this eco-village space allowing people to express themselves fully, it does sound quite utopian of how it all fits together. But I do believe that if people are allowed to be themselves, to express themselves, then people who are in the eco-village and who have received this space and received this peace to be able to do that will want to do something to help sustain that peace and to help the eco-village continue its work. And so the projects that will arise naturally, maybe not in the beginning, but I believe that very soon will become projects that focus on the eco-village as a whole and not on just the individual. Meaning when I go and make something, it won't be just something that I can put in my house. Obviously that's okay as well, but it will also be a need of mine to help fix up the whatever in the kitchen or do whatever needs to be done that I feel that can aid the eco-village. And if I can bring that back to what I was talking about in the beginning about Ubuntu, this idea that we need to utilize every individual's personal capabilities and personal talents and uniqueness and harness that for the greater good of the eco-village as a whole. Okay, so let me see how we're doing. I'm actually, I got through that a bit quicker than I'd thought. So let me just look up the Ubuntu quote, which I wanted to say. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't find it now. Okay, so let's move on. So what we have so far, if we try and recap what we've talked about, we have a space, the eco-village, which will be open to people who come without asking them for money in return. And these people will automatically be provided for their physical needs and their psychological and sociological needs, and will be provided with a space where they can actually have the environment and the tools for them to be able to discover themselves and have this whole organism, this whole establishment working together in order to keep it being sustained and in order to give back so that it can continue to do what it's been doing. So that's the idea in general. If you have any thoughts, I'd like to hear. Tainted Blood said, we need to be like Stoics, have purpose in all we do, not let ourselves fall into letting our emotions get ahead of us. We need to be like a philosopher, considering all things, setting our codes of life, putting our words to action, like a child, always carefree, enjoy each moment and love freely. Wow, is that yours or is that a quote? That's that's very, very well put. I would say I completely agree. I think not not let ourselves fall into letting our emotions get ahead of us is very interesting. I think that our emotions get ahead of us and get out of hand when they are not in balance, when we have needs that aren't being met, when we feel to a certain degree that something is lacking. And if I can just very quickly connect it to nonviolent communication, which is again a very big part of the ecoVillage model, once all of our needs are met, or as long as we feel that our needs are met and whatever needs we'll have will be met as well, then we have this sort of peace and calmness that comes over. I think to a certain degree we've all experienced it, where we're sort of content, not even happy or excited, but simply content with what is. And in that space, that peace, you can sort of really reach a very special level, I feel, whether it's creatively or whether it's whatever you want to do, where you're not acting, as you said, we're not getting our emotions ahead. I'm not acting out of fear or love or anger, but I'm actually doing things in the moment, like a child would. Oh, wow. Well, that was very nice, Tainted Blood. Thank you very much for sharing. Okay. So I think that's what I wanted to talk about now. If I may have your attention for a few more minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit more, since Tainted Blood spoke about it and mentioned the aspect of creativity, because it really is a crucial part of the ecoVillage and of people managing to work together to be able to bring this to fruition. So when we talk about creativity, I was just starting to talk about it a little bit before. I'd like to coin this term, which is physical creativity. And so what I mentioned before, in my life I was creative, whether it was writing or playing music, but I never had something physical to show for it afterwards. And as someone who was experienced for many years, and a lot of my friends were sort of artists, and they just sit down at one of the hangs and draw while everyone is talking, and 15 minutes later they'd have this beautiful portrait. I swear, one of them on this little piece of paper I hung on my fridge for years. It was amazing. It's one of the best pictures of me playing guitar. And I was very, very envious, I have to admit, that at the end of the evening, after I'd played all my songs, I really had nothing to show for it. And they had all of these sort of souvenirs, these physical things in reality that they could both appreciate and enjoy afterwards, but also compare and really, remember it forever. And I think that helped me realize the importance of having this physical creativity, because I want to separate it from people who can feel creative in their jobs. A lot of people can come up with creative solutions and solve problems. That's a different kind of creativity. What I call physical creativity is the act of creating something physical in the real world. And there seems, in my mind, to be something ironically almost spiritual about that. That sense of taking something and molding and shaping and changing it into something else according to what we want is a very, very empowering feeling. And I don't think it pertains necessarily just to art, or depends on how you classify art, but I mean when you're building whatever, a house or a water system, or when you're fixing whatever it is, a problem in your home, there's this sense of accomplishment that isn't quite comparable to anything else, where you sort of really feel you've created something real in the world, as it were. And I think that's a part of creativity that, especially in our virtual society, as someone who is speaking words over the internet to your virtual devices, we seem to be lacking a certain amount of physical creativity, people creating things, in the physical world. So that is a very important point. Tainted Blood just said, people forget there is more than just fine arts that constitute creativity. Absolutely. Creativity is a very interesting word. I think it can almost be applied to anything. So it's very interesting to try and define what creativity is and how we can develop it. Before we go, I can see we've got 10 more minutes. I just want to go back to what, I can't remember who said it. Someone mentioned Venus, the Venus Project. Some very, very crucial differences in my mind between the ecoVillage model and Venus Project. I heard about Venus Project quite a while ago. It's a very interesting idea, and I think there is a lot to learn from the project. But there is one very crucial thing which actually pertains to a lot we were talking about today, which is the natural element. And that's something that was crucial for me, that was missing, even in the feeling when people were talking about this hyper-automation, having robots and AI doing everything for people, and people being allowed to completely be aloft, as it were. I think it actually relates to what I was just talking about, where I feel there is a very big need for grounding as well. At the same time that we have machines and we have higher, loftier things that we're dealing with, it's very, very important to maintain our connection and to maintain grounding to literally the ground, to the earth. There's something about working with the earth and working in the ground that is really biological and really unlike any other line of work. And I'm not saying that this is, obviously, we always need the balance between the two, but in the Venus Project specifically, I felt that it was a little bit too imbalanced towards machines and virtuality and non-physical realms. So that's a little bit of my my rant against the Venus Project. Again, it's an amazing project, and I don't mean to say that it's something bad. That's just the point that I find is very hard for me to reconcile with it. Okay, Revised Sociology has said Marx would agree. Economic and philosophical manuscripts. It's how we come to know our humanity, and at least partly why he hated industrial capitalism so much, alienation. Absolutely, I have to say there's a lot of Marx that I disagree with, but there is definitely a lot that I do agree with. His analysis is very, very interesting, and we see again this disconnection and this imbalance in a lot of different areas. We can point to this imbalance in creativity and physicality, all of these different areas. Okay, Tainted Blood said physical and spiritual grounding, something we lack even in current society. Absolutely, and I really believe that without that, both physical and spiritual grounding, an idea like the ecoVillage can't really exist. It needs to be at the same time grounded and physical and in existence, and yet have creative people, new people coming, changing things, allowing for innovation. And again, the balance between those two, so as not to become too stagnant on the one hand, but not to be too disconnected and not grounded enough. So yes, oh, thank you all very much. Very good comments. Swoop said play wicked game. I'm not sure what that means, I apologize. I wanted to just say before, because we've got about 6 more minutes, Rondon, is there a show after me? Is Furious on tonight? I don't actually know. Let me just pull up the MSP Waves, the schedule, to see a little bit, because if he's after, one moment, sorry. What are we today? Thursday. That makes sense. Okay. So let's, I hope he's on after me today. Generally speaking, let me have a look. Sounds of the Underground with Captain Fury is on afterwards from 11 to 12. And that's it actually is a great show. I haven't had the luck of catching it yet, but it sounds very much up my street. Correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, because I haven't actually heard it. So let me know. But there's going to be music. It's beat, hippie, punk, rave, and sci. And it's a place that welcomes travelers, rebels, anarchists, ravers, squatters, hippies, freaks, rascals, fairies, artists, and musicians. People with a heart in the right place and the gut to fight for the right thing. My chosen family. Let's come together to share the stories, a little chit-chat, and some smashing tunes. Oh no, and after all that he won't be. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but you'll be able to look forward to next week. I haven't managed to catch his show yet. It's been, I think, 3 weeks now that I'm constantly waiting. But anyway, Crimson Clad, thank you so much for reminding me. I'm going to keep my eye on the time. Crimson Clad is on later on. Where are we? Full Force Radio at 1 a.m. So that's in a couple of hours. And that's, I've heard your show. That's heavy metal and talking in between, right? It's not just music. Although I think in the description it says, is he not well? Then I do hope he's feeling better. I haven't actually met him yet. Sorry about that. There's one more comment that I missed from Tainted Blood. Too many jobs we have now require we disconnect from the world around us. Hardly time to reflect upon the day or energy, as most jobs in the industrialized economy zap the individual of their energy. Sap, maybe? From the separation of self. Absolutely. Tainted Blood, I really feel the same. Indeed, the ecoVillage, one of its many things is meant to allow us to unite the time that we spend at work and the time that we spend with loved ones, and get rid of this concept of work as something that's distant and bad and that we have to do, and instead replace it with our enjoyment and what we want to spend our time doing. Exactly. So you're saying he's going to change the dates of his show so he won't be after me? Oh, well, I hope he comes back whenever he does. I was looking forward to having him after me because I thought it was, a good combination of shows together. But whenever he is, that will be wonderful. Sorry. I see. Okay. Sorry about that. I've got a bit of a cough. Well, that was basically it. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you very, very much for tuning in to the live show, if it's on Discord and for joining in, or if it's on Vim TV or MSP Waves or anywhere else. I really, really do appreciate it. If you're listening to this after, then thank you very much. I'm actually looking for a way to be able to upload this podcast regularly, the files. I haven't quite found a place yet. D-Sound seems to be giving me some troubles. I lost the last episode. I don't know where it is anymore. So I'm going to see. Wait, Swoop, you said you'll be after my show or Crimson's show? That's not after me. Fake news. Okay. Well, that's it from me, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be here next week as usual with another episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast. So until then, have a wonderful night. Enjoy your time. And I will see you next week.